Okay, I think we'll get started. This is the VAPALS ELCAP OSEHRA Working Group meeting for Wednesday, February 13th. This is your usual reminder that we are recording, and we will be putting the recording up on YouTube so that anybody can see it if they should so wish. We're going to be talking, George is going to be showing us something today, and then Rick is going to be sharing something with us. Is there anybody, sorry, uh, is there any announcements or anything that anybody wants to make before we dive in? Hearing nothing, let's go ahead and take it away, George.
Thank you, Linda. We're going to show today some fresh off the presses revisions to our user reports. These were requested a while ago by the LCAP team, and we have gotten the time to implement them now. So the follow-up, I don't know if you guys recall, most of these reports used to just have 3 or so columns on them with very little information. You know, with some of these fields are on them, but this is the, you know, that we had needed expanded information. So here's the follow-up report. And we get the follow-up date, the name which is clickable. You can navigate to the patient's base, what do you call it? Case
review page.
Case review page, exactly. And we pick up the Social Security number, the baseline date. I'll come back to that. The recommendation, and I'll come back to that. The when, the last exam, the status. The status ought to be active or inactive, and so you see some of our test patients were existed before we put in the active and inactive switch on the intake form, so they don't have it populated. So there's an example of an inactive. And then the street address, and not all of them have the street address either. So, but here, the follow-up form is coming along. The baseline date, I don't think, I think I'm picking up here the, I may be picking up the baseline date, which as being the date of the first CT eval report that is filled out for the patient. And I think you have the ability, let's say, you know, we're 4 or 5 years in. Well, I have a question. Maybe Arctic, maybe you can answer this. If a patient has a number of CT eval reports, is it possible that they will have another CT eval report and that would be marked as a baseline? And if so, should I be finding it and putting that baseline here as the baseline date? You know, but that's an open question I got. Do I need to look further than the first CT scan that was marked as a baseline? And let's see, this recommend here. Anyway, I got a question on this one also. We may be able to, because on our forms, we have the ability to recommend more things than just one. And I don't know if I should be adding those to this column. So let's show you where the recommend occurs. So let's go to CT evaluation for this patient, and down here, here's the recommend. So you can have these things, and if you fill out any of these, you know, it's going to be a full CT scan. But then you have these things here you can add: diagnostic, CT, PET scans, etc. These are also recommendations. And should they go in that recommend? I'm thinking they might go So one thing I'm thinking of doing is adding those, expanding that, that column to have more than just the flow diagnostic. So that's follow up. The activity report has undergone major changes. We have the name, social security number, the study date, and this is the study date, that the activity, where the activity happened. I mean, basically, it's generally the CT form, and what type of CT form was that, a follow-up or baseline, etc. What the CT protocol was, what the follow-up was, and this again similar to on the follow-up screen. The activity report will show what the recommendation is, and if we expand the follow-up, the recommendation on that, or we'll probably also expand this if there are more than one things that are due for follow-up. This is not always being checked. This is not always coming through, and I'm going to talk to Dom, I think, about this, because this field doesn't always persist and doesn't come through to the server when you click it all the time. And then we get the dates here. So that's the activity report. The missing CT evaluation report. This has been simplified. We took out any follow-up information out of it. We just have these three: the enrollment date, the name, and the social security number. For those who have had an intake form but have no CT evaluation form, which means, there may have been one done and the form wasn't filled out, etc. But this is a way of tracking people who have. What happened?
George, I just had a chance to come in because we were having problems getting on.
Oh, hi, Claudia. So I should go back. I should go back.
So were you able to get all the fields that we had on our report?
Yeah, I believe these are all the fields that you have on your report. And I have a few that I have questions about.
Okay.
But here, so this is the follow-up form, and this is from the spreadsheet that Artit sent me. These are all the fields that you were asking for.
George, could you bump up the font size a little bit?
Sure.
Because we can only see it on a tiny little computer, not on the screen. There's a name, baseline date, recommended when, last exam status, and any more that we can't see on the.
No, that's all. That's all that I saw on the spreadsheet that Artit sent.
Okay.
Those were all the ones I had.
This is the follow-up form for anybody who requires, and we say what the follow-up is. Okay.
Right. So this is the one. This is what I got from Artit, was this form.
Okay. Okay. Great.
And that's what I've done here. So.
Okay, and so you can put in dates from to start.
No. You told me the first priority was to get all the columns right.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Second priority was to get the dates.
Okay, fine. Just asking. No, terrific.
Okay, good. So that's follow up. So let's go. Let me show you activity. And these are the new columns also.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I see when in 1 month, and then the actual date is there. Okay.
Right, exactly.
And so just moving down, it lists everybody who needs follow-up.
No, this is the activity report. This is anybody who had activity in the last month.
Yeah, okay.
So.
Great.
Okay, now let's see. The next report is, this is the missing CT evaluation. This means these are the people who have had an intake form filled out, but there's no CT eval form yet for them.
Okay.
which means that there's probably they're scheduled or something, or whatever.
Yeah, so there's no, okay.
So so that's something to track. Let's see. Then incomplete form. These are all the people with incomplete forms. Now, I'm not quite done with this. I'm not. These are the internal names of the forms and dates. I'm gonna change this. This will say CT evaluation form dash and the date for it. And these will be clickable. And I'm gonna make these clickable. So you just click on it. And you can go to
great. So you just click on them
and go to the form, right? So this patient has 3 forms that are incomplete. I'll have the real form name and the date, and then you'll be able to just click on it and go straight to. And I think I'll take this out, this column out.
It doesn't need to add anything.
Well, and also it's hard to match if there's 3 of them. How do you do it across these columns? So each so there'll be 3 entries here. I'll put them in a line, and I'll give the name of the report and dash the date, the date of the report, and that'll be clickable. You can go straight to the form to fill it out.
Okay. Okay. Sounds great.
Let's see here.
Good progress.
Yeah, we made it. I got a lot done. This is the enrollment report, and I'm having this is the this is the one I'm having the most trouble with actually to finding the fields. I don't see on any of our forms that we have race or ethnicity, and we should be pulling that from Vista anyway, but I don't think we pull it right now from Vista. So I got to look into and talk to Larry to see if we can or can pull race and ethnicity from Vista for these patients.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember from where we had race and ethnicity. Where do we have it on our background?
It was on the background form, yes.
Yeah, but it's not. But it's not on ours, as far as I can tell.
Well, but
so
because
see.
we use the ones that are designated by NIH, and so that should be the same in the VA. I think shouldn't be different.
Right. But here's the background form, our background form, and we don't have any place where you have race or ethnicity for the patient on our background form.
Left off in the translation.
Well, no, I think there was a discussion back when that information's already captured in Vista, and so we shouldn't be capturing it again. So I think we need to go to Vista and find it. We need to go,
Well, no, but see that I disagree with that philosophy, because the whole idea was that you would have this is a standalone system. It also provides things to Vista, and it can get things from Vista, but I think it should then populate. There should be fields in the form that show race and ethnicity.
Okay. Well, I'm having trouble with those 2 columns right now.
Yeah.
And smoking status. I'm having trouble with smoking status.
It should say current or former or pack years. Those you get from the intake form.
Well, here's the intake form.
Yeah.
So I've got
past, current. It has that information, and then it has the total pack years and years quit. So it just should have the pack years and quit date.
So this is packs per day, right?
Yeah.
This is
there.
packs per day. So this is years.
It should be the ones that are checked up there: past, current, or never smoked, past or current, and then it should say quit years, pack years, and then says quit date.
Oh, all right. So I'm not sure how to put that on this form. That's all. Here we got a place here for a column for smoking status.
Oh, so all you need there really is if they're a current or a former or a never smoker. It's just that one column.
Now they can check more than one of those. And should I have everything that they checked in that column?
No, it should only be, you can't be a current smoker and be a past smoker, and you can't be a never smoker and be former or current. So those had to be mutually exclusive. You can change them, but they were mutually exclusive. That top row, it can only be one of those. So yeah, of the top three, it can only be one of those. But you should be able to change them.
I could change them, but I could do all of them actually.
Well, so that's a mistake.
All right. All right. So whichever one of these is checked is what I should put in that column.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Because that then tells them if they should give smoking cessation advice or what they should do.
Right. Okay. Now, do we need race and ethnicity on this report? On this enrollment report?
Not really needed.
So why don't we just take them off?
Well, the only thing is that in the end, when you have to make a report, and so you do have to have race and ethnicity in your reports that you make for each site. So what troubles me only is that you don't have it there's no field in the forms that have that information. You don't really need to have it there, except if you're trying to, and by the way, where's the rural status? There's no rural status.
Oh, we need that.
Yeah, you need
Oh, I wonder if that status, yeah, we need rural status in here someplace. That's important.
Right, which we never had in ours, so it needs to be there somewhere. And then if they just want to, they can download it and put it in Excel spreadsheets and do whatever. So they should have the race and ethnicity.
Okay, so we need it on this report, and we'll add rural status to it also.
Right.
Wonderful. And that's what I had. That's all of them. I have nothing for outreach. We haven't defined what the outreach report is, and either we should,
No, but this is already great. This will help the navigators a lot. And when you get now, so I said the fields were the most important, and then what did I say next?
The next, I got to be able to do these date ranges. You've got to put it in date range and get it filtered by a date.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
All righty.
Awesome.
Anybody got any questions? Okay.
I have a question. This is just for OSEHRA's sake, and what's this? This is obviously new development, and I want to know are you guys planning to submit the software as it was previously, or is there a totally different plan now? You're not planning to submit the software for certification at this point.
I guess we were hoping to include this in the software we're submitting to certification.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's right now. If you access our repo, this software is there. This is what's there.
No, I understand. I understand that. We earlier, I think back around January 20th, you said you're going to need 4 more weeks or something.
Right. So I mean, we haven't done the journal. What do you call it? The journal article yet.
So no, I just wanted to know whether you're still on that same timeline, or do you plan?
Okay. So anyway, this work. To answer the first question, this work will be included in what we're going to put in the journal, submit in the journal article. And now the timeline, Nancy, I'll leave that to Linda to answer.
Yeah. So as far as I know, we are still waiting for a couple of things from the users. Is Ricardo on?
I think that's on Art's end. He needs to mute. There we go. Well done.
Okay. So I don't know if Ricardo's on. I'm trying to. I believe.
I mean, the other Rick.
Yeah, I know you are here, but I don't think. So I believe we've just gotten. That's it. we just got what we hope is the final intake form format, which Dominic is working on. And once we've had, and so we are late getting our final user feedback. But we're working to see, we're trying to get it as soon as we can. It shouldn't be too much longer. Does that sound right, Rick?
Yeah, I mean, to clarify, we can't submit it to OSEHRA until the ILCAP folks give us the thumbs up and say this is sound from a medical perspective. Because we're not going to try to make a deadline by submitting something that's not medically coherent.
Yeah, I understand. Just help us plan, please. That's all we want to know. And
exactly. So where we are,
last time we heard it was a month out, and I don't think that's true anymore. So
no, so we can give you the update as of this call. Yeah, they did a big overhaul of the way that the intake process works and the way the intake forms look, and so that's got to be included in what we submit to you. And then we use this time as well, as you can see, to polish up the reports to also include things that were important to them. So if we're right, what we have just received as far as the specs for the intake form and for these reports are the final user-driven change for the current version. Of course, more things can come in patches later on, but as far as what we submit to OSEHRA, we think we've now finally been given the specs for the software that we have to develop and give you. And so we've been developing all along incrementally as we've been getting information. And so the overwhelming majority of the application is ready to go. But now we need to get these reports polished, and we need to implement these intake form changes. And when both of those are done to the satisfaction of the ILCAP group, then it's time for our submission.
I think
fair enough.
Claudia and or George can correct me, but I believe that there's also a little bit more to do on the CT report to make sure that that is exactly as it's supposed to be.
Yeah, we got a couple changes we've agreed to make on that as well. So.
Okay. So, yeah, we're doing the best we can, but it is taking a little longer than we would like.
No, I certainly understand. I mean, just sort of have a block of weeks we were anticipating for a submission. We just we now know that we're not expecting it when we need to plan for something else. That's all.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Sam.
No problem.
Anybody else have a question or comment? Okay, Rick, show us cool stuff.
Well, I could show interesting stuff. So as our lead into the second half of this call, I need to announce that we're now leaving behind the medical side of VAPALS, and we're going to talk about the technical side of VAPALS. So people who are primarily here to see the medical stuff and who don't have an interest in the technical architecture, feel free to drop off. If you do, feel free to stay. And I'll attempt to describe this in ways that are not, that are comprehensible to people without the deep technical background. The problem that I'm going to talk about today, which I'm going to sketch solutions for, but not offer final solutions for, is a problem that all Vista systems have had since about 1989, and it's been long overdue to solve. And it's been exacerbated by the growing community outside of the VA, outside the federal government, outside VA and IHS. It's been exacerbated by the adoption of repos, Git repositories as a method of distributing software and version controlling it. And ultimately, these and other threads and influences have come together to where the VAPALS ELCAP project is the one where we have to crack this problem and solve it. So what I'm going to talk about here is something that some of us have been talking about for decades, off and on, and that we're coming to a point of finally having traction on it, and it's directly relevant to VAPALS ELCAP. And it answers the following question. To give you the background, MUMPS-based systems, when they were first being used to develop medical software, the MUMPS isn't just a programming language. For those who don't know, Vista and MUMPS-based systems are not just written in MUMPS. They also run in MUMPS. It also defines a virtual machine that describes an operating environment, and includes a database and a transaction processing system and a whole bunch of other things, all integrated together into one sort of virtual machine. So as a result, it's possible, or it used to be possible, to be a MUMPS programmer and really ignore all the details of the hardware and the operating system. And part of the reason for that is that in old MUMPS-based systems, you couldn't see the operating system. It was as though it wasn't there. You were in a complete protected world in which MUMPS gave you a very simplified view of the computer. And the reason that this was important was that hardware was changing relentlessly, very, very fast, constantly. And if we were writing medical software that was tied to details of the hardware, our medical software would go obsolete almost immediately. As soon as the hardware changed, now our software doesn't run on it anymore because it's locked to the old hardware, and we'd have to rewrite it. Writing medical software with medicine constantly changing, with computer science constantly changing, and with the law about how you manage medical data constantly changing. This intersection of three powerful forces of change meant that the last thing in the world that we could afford to do was waste time constantly rewriting our software to work on new platforms. So a major part of the Vista and generally the MUMPS community's architectural strategy has always been not to lock ourselves down into the operating system, not to lock ourselves down to the hardware, not to lock ourselves to any one particular MUMPS implementer, but to make ourselves portable, to write code that's very portable, that treats the world underneath MUMPS in as abstract a way as possible, so that most of our software doesn't know and doesn't care what's under there. That's been deliberate from the beginning. But that all began to change in the late 80s when we shifted from the PDPs, from Digital Equipment Corporation, which were computers on which MUMPS really almost was the operating system, to the VAXs from Digital Equipment Corporation, which were computers that had their own operating system, VMS, and MUMPS was layered on top of VMS instead of directly onto the computer. And that introduced a new possibility. And the new possibility was, could you make use of the operating system's capabilities? Could you use the features of the operating system to help you? And at first, our strategy in the VA and elsewhere was to answer that question by saying no. We were concerned that the more we depended upon the operating system, the more we'd be locked into that operating system, we'd get all the problems of not being able to surf the hardware revolution. But as we then also branched onto Windows and onto Unix and other operating systems, it became clear that the operating system really doesn't have to be avoided per se. It has, even if the details of any particular operating system should be avoided, operating systems as a whole have a lot of capabilities in common that they all share, and that it would be not only acceptable, but desirable to tap into those capabilities and make them available to your MUMPS-based software. Your medical software needs to be able, for example, to think about the idea of a file, not just as a database file, as someplace you store information, but as an actual, container that lives in the operating system that has some data in it. When any of us interact with our workstations or computers, we're constantly opening files and editing files and so on. But these medical software-based systems, their fundamental idiom going back to the 1970s and even the 1960s was to pretend that none of that's there. And that's a major barrier to being able to really tap into the power of the system that's sitting underneath your medical software system. So increasingly in the late 90s and the early 2000s and now in the teens, I guess we're in the teenies, right? People have been writing tools and utilities and beginning to use them to generate files, to read in files. Our software, this VAPALS ELCAP project, is heavily based upon reading in HTML template files and then filling them with data out of our graph store and using that to create effectively a new virtual file that's submitted to the web server and presented in the browser for someone to edit. And likewise, going back the other direction, when someone has edited a form and they submit it, we get back this virtual file. and we parse it apart and pick out all the new data values and store them in our graph store. So there's now the files are no longer being treated from our perspective as a nice to have thing or a useful thing. They're part of the core architecture, and so is the directory structure. Where are those files on our system exactly? Becomes a make or break question to answer for our software. If we can't find our HTML template files, if they're not stored in a consistent location, then our software doesn't work. And because the handling of operating system files up until now had always been treated by other applications as a one-off thing, the usual solution to this problem was to say, well, let's not standardize anything. Let's just have a parameter somewhere, and that parameter will be the name of the directory that I'm interested in. And you can find in Vista and in other MUMPS-based systems, you can find in most of these systems that people will have some collection of parameters that's stored inside of MUMPS that they know to look up if they're trying to answer the question, where did I put my blank? So where are my routines? Well, they're over here. Where's my HTML files? Well, they're over there. So they'd have a handful of these kind of values stored. But we're now moving into an arena in which the idea that the answer to every question about where is something is I have to look it up in a parameter is going to rapidly turn into a morass of parameters. And the reason for that is we're now not just trying to find HTML files, we're trying to find web pages, we're trying to find kids distributions for updating our system, for doing patches, we're trying to find repositories where we're bringing in like Sam's latest changes to the M web server or kernel on GTM or what have you. We need repositories where we're keeping track of all the incoming patches that have been released by the VA and then distributed to the community by OSEHRA. There's an increasingly large number of sort of, if you think about it, feeds that are feeding information into the system. If we're going to keep these VAPALS servers up to date, we have to be able to locate all those feeds. And we have to know how information is organized within those feeds and what kinds of files are found in them. And just to give you a hint of what I'm talking about, if I'm here on Avicenna, I'm going to go back to the home directory on Avicenna. And if I do a ls, I'll do ls-al so that we can get a little bit more information for people so that they can kind of see our layout. We have a some of these directories are more important than others. The routines that we're actually running right now and the scripts that we use to support them are in our run directory. Our web stuff is in a virtual www directory that maps to somewhere else. We have a temp directory for temp files that we might want to throw away or use for a little while. And so on. We've sort of come up with this semi-standard convention for where information goes inside of your home directory. And the reason for that is that, you know, all these systems, it's hard to manage systems if everything is in a different place all the time. But for the question of the data feeding into our system, all these updates that are constantly being fed in, we've adopted the strategy that there will be a lib directory underneath our home directory. And inside the lib directory, we're going to do a top-level breakdown as follows. You see this copper, gold, and silver right here. And the idea is that the information flowing into our system has different levels of standardization and different levels of reliability. We have to know which of our repos follow the patterns that we're going to establish and which of the repos don't. The ones that don't, there might be limits to how much we can write automated software to parse those directories and pull information out of them. The ones that are more standardized, we can write a new generation of tools that knows where are the kids' distributions, where are the routines, where are the manuals, because they're all going to follow the same pattern. So this idea is captured in this very simple diagram. And the idea is that at present, the way that repos are done is a free-for-all. Everybody does whatever they feel like. They name them whatever they feel like. They organize them however they feel like. And as a result, they require manual intervention. You can basically write only the most vague automation tools to interact with those directories because God knows what's in there or how they're laid out. They're basically manual approaches to repositories. And one of the ways that becomes evident, I'm going to minimize this, and go in. Oh, you know what? I'm going to go here. I'm just trying to figure out how best to illustrate this. For the moment, I'm going to drop off of this system. I'm going to exit here and exit here. And I'm back. Now I'm on the directory for my laptop where I'm beginning to run these experiments. If I switch into my own lib directory and I do a listing, you can see I've got copper, gold, silver, and then some stuff that hasn't been sorted out yet. I'm going to switch into silver for the moment. Silver was the first of these 3 repo locations that we created when we had this idea. And so as a result, we have a lot of stuff under silver that shouldn't be there, as we'll talk about in a moment. And if I do a ls in here, what I want you to see is these are most of the repos that my laptop subscribes to, okay? And it's not a short list. And I'm not naming my directories exactly the same thing that the repos are called where they come from. And a good example of that is the kernel-gtm repo. I found that I have to put a little suffix on it because Christopher Edwards has a kernel-gtm repo, but so does Sam Habiel. They're both on GitHub. They're both available to pull down, and they both have exactly the same name. And because they have exactly the same name, there's the potential for collision. Now, GitHub is smart enough to know, you know, when you're using Git to manage repositories, it's smart enough to know where you got this repo from, and so it knows if I only had one kernel-gtm, it knows that, you know, which of the 2 it is, whether it's Sam's or whether it's Christopher's. But as a user looking at this directory, if all it says is kernel-gtm and there's multiple ones out there, I don't know what I'm looking at. I don't know which one it is. You can see the same thing comes up with munit, where I've got Joel's repo and I've got Sam's repo. And the mweb server, I have Sam's repo, and then I have another one that I haven't put a suffix on. And at this point, unless we use some tools to answer the question, I don't actually know where this data comes from or whose it is. And so as a result, I don't have any gut level way to know, is it being kept up to date? Is it something that I want to use? If I was looking for mweb server data, which of these 2 is the one that I ought to be using? The answer is, well, you just can't tell the way it is right now because it's a free-for-all. There's no pattern here. So it's clear that if we're going to move to a universe in which we can write standardized tools that can automatically mine these directories for data or help you to support them or figure out what's in them, we're going to have to standardize. We can't be in this non-standard world anymore. There's a book out there that talks about the theory of open source. It's well known by programmers. It's called The Cathedral and the Bazaar. And it talks about the way that you know, software development, when it's done, when it's completely controlled by one organization and nobody else is allowed to touch the software, like you typically get with Microsoft Windows. Microsoft develops Microsoft Windows. They are the holders of the code. They're the owners of the code. Nobody else is allowed to manage it except for their contractors and their employees. Or the Apple database, right? Really, most commercial products are developed. Most closed source commercial products are developed that way, and that has the advantage that whoever's in charge there, since there's only one decision-making unit, they can apply whatever standard or convention they want. In fact, it almost doesn't make sense to call it a standard because nobody else is playing. It's just them. It's just the pattern that they happen to be following. But the problem with that is that even though it gives you the ability to create a very coherent system of organization, it also invariably leads to stagnation. The cathedral's approach to things, as described in this book, has the advantage of standardization, but the drawback of stagnation. And so that's why the author of this book was highly advocating for open source software in which lots of people are allowed to do development. And theoretically, the whole world could do development if they want to. And then they negotiate amongst each other about who's the sources for which pieces of information and so on. And that has the opposite set of virtues and vices of the cathedral approach. When you're following the bazaar approach, you have a massive amounts of innovation. Anybody who has a good idea can take the code and begin adding things to it. But it has the drawback that standardization is often 100% lacking. And if it's not 100% lacking, it is often the case that it's still nevertheless so confusing and so disorganized that, like, for example, there might be 12 different standards for how to do it. This is something that often happens in bazaar approaches. And the problem is this. For medical software, where people's lives are at stake, you need both virtues. You can't just be doing a trade-off, and you can't just be doing a compromise. You need solid standardization for the things that have to be standardized. And you need massive amounts of innovation so that you can keep up with the pace of change in medicine, in computer science, and in the law affecting medical software and medical information. You have to have both. And in order to do that, you have to approach these things differently than they're typically done. So in the Vista community, within the VA and IHS, the solution that they adopted back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, which worked great for a long time until the fragmentation of the community, is as follows. They said, we're not going to centralize, we're going to decentralize, but we're going to concentrate authority. And so every different application will have its own source of authority. The lab application will be developed by lab developers who are driven by lab expert users. The pharmacy application will be developed by pharmacy developers who are driven by pharmacy expert users. And the lab people don't need the permission of the pharmacy people in order to change lab, and the pharmacy people don't need permission from the lab people. So it's decentralized. But those teams do have the ability to enforce standards and to say how they're going to be laying out their software and how they're going to do their upgrades. So you can get standards, therefore, within the applications. And furthermore, they're going to talk to each other, and they're going to form some committees, like the Standards and Conventions Committee, that are going to come up with common guidelines that all the teams are going to agree to follow. So what this does is it unplugs the simple binary tension between the cathedral and bazaar and creates a new kind of structure for authority and decision making that makes it possible to both get the standardization that's required for medical software to get the safety you need, and the innovation that's required in order to keep up with the pace of change. So we're now at a point where we need to do the same thing with the way that we lay out our directories and repositories. We have the same problem that the Vista world was trying to solve back in the 70s and 80s and 90s. We have that now. Our repos all they're named whatever people can think of as an idea, and there's no way that a piece of software could read the name of a repo and figure out what the contents are. It's not machine parsable. It requires a human being to intervene. And the contents are the same way. What's in there, what subdirectories exist within that, and where, if you were writing software that was supposed to fetch a kid's distribution and load it into a Vista environment, every repo is storing those things in a different place. And so the software you couldn't write the software in a practical way. If you're dealing with dozens or hundreds of repos, each of which is bringing in kids distributions, you just cannot have dozens or hundreds of parameters that are all having to be manually filled in and located as the way of managing this. We've reached the point where we need some standardization that says if you have a standardized repo and it's following the rules, then the software will know that all the distributions that are part of that repo are going to be in the following subdirectory, and it'll know that all of the routines are going to be in this other subdirectory, and that all of the documentation, the manuals, will be in yet another subdirectory. It has to know those things. So we need a standard. Now, because we are a decentralized community and because we don't want to thwart innovation, we have to come up with a gradient of repos that allows us to strike whatever balance is appropriate for the repo in question. And we have to sort our repos and place them into subdirectories so that the software knows in advance whether it's talking about a repo that it can parse or a repo that it cannot parse. So we've come up with a 3-part system for doing these repos. We actually have a 4-part system, and I'll tell you about the 4th kind of repo in a moment. But the 4th kind of repo isn't about answering this question. It isn't about this kind of problem. So Copper is the model that we're going with for repos the way they are done now, in which people name them whatever they want, they organize them however they want. That's fine. All of those things should go under Copper. And because they're under Copper, because there's a place for them, people can do whatever they want. And if there's difficulty in figuring out which is which, well, that's the nature of Copper repos. It's okay. The software is not going to try to solve. We're not going to try to write software that somehow figures out where to grab stuff out of Copper. It's a manual area, and people are organizing things without following any standards. That's great. They can do the same things they have always done with repos, where they manually lay them out and then they manually fetch things out of them or put things into them. Great. That's fine. So we've now handled the case that exists today. What we want to get to for some of the most important repos, the repos that feed the stream of patches into an environment that account for all or almost all of the patches that get installed to keep that environment up to date, is we want to take the ideas that the VA came up with its forum system, its patch module system, and its kids installation and distribution system, and we want to recreate that inside the world of repositories, so that the repos are laid out in a very consistent way that ideally is completely machine parsable, and that in fact no human being even edits those gold repos. The idea would be that the way that standardization is maintained in a gold repo, the main source of software, is that software puts things into those repos. And because it will be consistently following the rules it's programmed to follow and the tables that it's following, everything in those gold repos will be 100% consistent. And because they're 100% consistent, they'll be 100% parsable. So what we'll be talking about is taking the patch module ideas that were developed in the VA and that were upgraded in an OSEHRA project several years ago, and doing a new version of that to finish what we started in that project and get to the point where we could be distributing patches and distributing new versions and distributing documentation updates in a 100% consistent machine-driven way, so that we could then, on the receiving end, start to write the tools that have always been missing in the Vista world to start doing things like patch analysis and auto-patching and so forth, resolution with conflicts with local mods. There's a whole range of very important tools for managing Vista-based systems that can only be developed once you have this nut cracked. Now, because these two things are so far apart, and because they present seemingly an insurmountable gulf, we have Silver in between the two. And the idea of Silver is that Silver repos follow the same standards that gold repos will someday follow once we're in the position to create them. But we're doing it manually, which means there might be mistakes. We're learning as we go. We have to get better as we go. But Silver repos are where we're going to be developing the patterns that we follow, how subdirectories are laid out, which directories go in where, what we name files, where we put things, and so forth. This is the area where we're going to develop our standards and manually follow our standards. And because this is a learning area, we're frequently going to be doing this one application at a time. So VAPALS ELCAP, for example, is an application. So that gives us a toolbox to, a sandbox, if you will, to play with, to sort out what are the right standardized ways to lay out the subdirectories and try to get it right until it looks like a kind of a manually developed prototype for what we can then later write the software to automatically do. Now, gold repos, like we're talking about moving to eventually someday, typically they're not for distributing one application at a time. They're for distributing an entire dialect, which means all of the applications that are typically installed upon some set of systems in the world, like the VA sites, right? In theory, not setting aside the question of local mods and innovations, generally speaking, all VA sites are based on some common set of software that's distributed from their central forum system. So they're all running the same dialect. Indian Health Service gets access to that dialect, but then they customize and change things before they distribute it out to all the IHS sites. So the IHS sites are running a different dialect than the VA is running. But generally speaking, again, all IHS sites are running on the same dialect. They're all receiving the same stream of updates. I happen to have a couple of little diagrams here I can show you. This is an old diagram. I'm going to do a new one in a moment. I'll show you a newer one in a moment. But this is an old dialect that Carol Monahan and I developed to try to answer the question, what are the main Vista dialects that exist in the world, and what are their relationships to each other? And so if we look on here, we'll see OSEHRA Vista right here, right? And World Vista EHR and MedSphere. And they're based on a number of things, but they're largely based on the FOIA Vista that's released by the VA, and that's only slightly different from the VA Vista that's run inside the VA, which in turn derive from earlier dialects and so on. So this is a greatly simplified diagram. It's only capturing a certain amount of data because the relationships among these dialects, they're actually a lot more complex than this suggests. But it does show some of the main influences that have come along. Ken took a stab at trying to make a simpler version of this Oh, that's not it. Oh, Lineage of Vista. Here we go. He took a stab at trying to make a version of this that made it clearer when the branches occurred and what the relationship, which ones are related and which ones aren't, so you could see it visually. Now, this is only notional. If you look at the dates and try to say, are these dates accurate? I'll tell you in advance, the answer is no. And likewise, if you try to answer the question, well, are we showing the influences here correctly? The answer to that's no, too. This is just a straw man mock-up of a sort of a timeline-based approach of trying to show what are the different Vista dialects. And this matters because if you have a site that's running VA Vista, like say your Puget Sound VA, let's say your Phoenix VA, and you're running VA Vista, and someone sends you a patch that's not for VA Vista, but that's for RPMS, Indian Health Services Vista, and you try to install that patch on your system, it might work, but there's a reasonable likelihood that you'll break things. So it's very important to know which dialect you're subscribing to patches for. I mean, if you don't know that, you can't update your system. It's like it is the first and major question that determines which patches you should be installing. So if we're talking about repos, ideally we want to have a gold repo for VA Vista, we want to have a gold repo for OSEHRA Vista, we want to have a gold repo for World Vista EHR, we want to have a gold repo for RPMS, and so on. Each of these things should have a gold repo, and that gold repo will contain all of the applications, all of the patches for all of the applications, so that somebody who is just trying to keep their system up to date isn't searching through dozens or hundreds of repos trying to figure out, do I have to update this one? Do I have to update this one? Do I have to update this one? They want to simply be able to say, give me an update of the entire distribution. And now as time permits, I can see the changes and I can install the changes when I'm ready to do so. It makes it simple for a system that's trying to stay up to date with one dialect. Now, that's not exactly the situation that we have with VAPALS ELCAP. With VAPALS ELCAP, we're currently focusing on development of one application, right? A Vista application that could be installed inside of a Vista system. But what we have been learning, and so as a result, silver repos, you know, where gold repos are almost entirely focused on an entire dialect at a time with all of its sub applications and the applications with all their subversions and so on. A silver repo is frequently not about an entire dialect. It's frequently just about one application. And certainly in the world of copper, it's almost always just applications or parts of applications even. It may not even, in the example of Sam's kernel GTM repo, which we depend upon on this project, he's not trying to cover all of kernel and everything that kernel ever does. That may or may not be in his repo, but that's not his focus. His focus is on how do I upgrade kernel so that it does a better job of running on top of the GTM platform. And that's what we need it for. So I said applications here under innovation here for copper, but it may even just be modules or selected parts of applications that are in here. So there's differences about what the content is, and there's differences about how the content is organized. And over time, with the silver repos, we're gonna work our way up to handling an entire dialect at a time. The reason for that is these VAPALS servers that we're going to be installing in the VA, they don't just need to be kept up to date with the VAPALS ELCAP innovations that the ILCAP folks and the rest of this project come up with together. They also need to be kept up to date with the standard patches that come from OSEHRA Vista, which in turn come from FOIA Vista, which come from the VA. As the VA is upgrading the broker and kernel and FileMan and all of these things that our application depends on, we need to be installing those upgrades on our servers, which means we're really not just, we're doing two things with these servers. We're keeping our own application up to date. Yes, that's our primary focus. But in order to do that, we're also having to keep the entire Vista code base underneath it up to date, the whole dialect. And when you take a look at what that dialect is, and when you try to answer the question, you know, which of these choices is it? The actual answer is none of the above. It's none of the above. We are strongly based on OSEHRA Vista. Make no doubt. I mean, we are as closely tied to OSEHRA Vista as we can be. We're wanting to leverage all the great work that the OSEHRA community is doing. So that's the default of our base. But on top of that, we're also installing some of these other repositories that are out there in the world. just point to a couple of key examples to give you a hint of what I mean. If I go up here, where's the MWeb server? Oh, it's in capitals. Of course it is. MWeb server. SAM's MWeb server. This is one of the centerpieces of our architecture, right? We're serving up HTML pages, right? Taking the templates, filling in the data from the graph store, submitting to the MWeb server, and then he presents them out to the browser. And likewise, as the user fills in the data comes back to the MWeb server and comes back to calling our services, which in turn pull the data back out of the updated HTML form and store it in our graph store. So we desperately depend upon SAM's work here, but that is not part of FOIA Vista from the VA. VA, you know, was involved with MWeb server development and interested in it, but they never quite got their act together. Another example is MUnit. Joel Ivey developed this and couldn't get the VA to release it, so after he left the VA, he gave it to the community, and OSEHRA certified it. Sam and Joel continue to work on it and make great innovations. Our unit tests are based on the MUnit framework. We use this tool extensively. Kernel on GTM, right here. Sam's excellent work, and Christopher and others and Bhaskar have contributed to making it so that the kernel application, which is one of the main applications in Vista responsible for supporting Vista on top of whatever your operating system is and whatever your hardware is, hiding those portability impacts from the rest of the system. They've done great work in making the system work better on GTM. We have to have that in our environment. So this is just 3. The list goes on. The MUMPS Advanced Shell. When you start looking at all these pieces, you quickly realize that none of the answer to the question, which dialect is our application running on top of, is none of the above. It's none of the above. So for purposes of thinking about the software lifecycle for these VAPAL servers, this project is actually doing not one thing, but a couple of things. It's not just putting out the VAPALS ELCAP application. It's also managing and updating a VAPALS dialect, which is closely related to OSEHRA Vista, but has a lot of FOIA Vista, but has a lot of community contributions, and might even have bug fixes from us as well that we had to develop as part of this project. So there's 2 layers going out in what we're sending out, and ideally that means we should be having 2 different repositories, one that's focused on our software, and one that has all the patches for the underlying system, so that we don't mix the 2 up and confuse them with each other. So today we're not going to talk about that. Today we really are just introducing the problem of kind of what's the nature of the things that are out there that we're having to take care of, and why is it that we're talking about standardizing our directory structures and our file names, so that we can support the tools that fit within this larger framework of what needs to be updated over time on these servers. You know, in order to make sure we wrap up on the hour, I'm going to close out with sort of 2 quick comments, and one of them is this. When we look at the last 40 years of Vista implementations in the world, and we say which ones thrived and which ones failed, consistently the ones that failed are ones that, regardless of their other innovations, regardless of the money that they spent, regardless of the power of the organizations or their commitment, it's the ones that didn't manage change. Is the ones that didn't think through the answer to the question, how do I keep these systems up to date over time? The ones that said, I'm going to treat this like a commodity product, like a television set or something, and not change it, they all failed. That you just cannot handle the constant pace of change in medicine, the constant pace of change in computer science, and the constant pace of change in the law by saying, no, I'm not going to change anything. You have to be able to manage all this change, and you have to manage it smoothly. The ones that succeeded are the ones that figured out the answer to this question. And so that's why we're focusing on this area. This is something I'm hoping to sort out a little bit between now and when we submit to OSEHRA to do some standardization and reorganization of these repos. I think the second comment I'll just postpone until the next time. And wrap it up here so that we can pause for questions, and then I can hand it back to Linda to close out the call.
Okay, so anybody have questions after that? I think probably most people are like me and have to kind of take it in first before having some really good comments.
Yeah, that makes sense. So next time we do one of these technical chats at the tail end of our OSEHRA call, I'm going to open up and show you guys some examples of what I mean. We can show you some repository names, we can show you some environment names, some directory names, and we can talk about kind of what are the emerging standards and why are we going there.
So Rick, this is just for you to read. I have a page on the series on installing Vista, on patching up Vista, and it doesn't say anything that you don't already know, obviously, but it just you know, it's a good backgrounder.
I would love to read that.
Perhaps Sam, if you don't mind, you could make a little post in our OSEHRA blog with the link for that if it's on one of your web
Here,
pages.
I just pasted it in the chat right now, though. So.
Oh, okay. Okay. I have that. Okay. Anything else before we say goodbye?
Delay meeting. Okay, no.
Well, thanks everybody for their time, and hopefully we'll be talking to you next week. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone. See you guys.